What would a government-created financial crisis be without chief spreading bull Elizabeth Warren chiming in with her genuine brand of woke nonsense and disinformation? This is a woman who has always been on the wrong side of history, and now she's trying to blame Donald Trump for the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. She couldn't be more wrong. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel where we are the antidote to the daily onslaught of radical woke Marxist propaganda. So Elizabeth Warren jumped into the conversation of the Silicon Valley Bank collapse, and she went on Rachel Maddow Show, I know her name is Rachel, and said that Trump's bank deregulation reliefs are what caused the crash. Warren is doing her part as a little cog in the big Democrat machine, pushing the lie that the Democrats will use to eventually grab more control over the markets, the banks, and other financial institutions, and then ultimately push for digital currency. When digital currency comes to life, your life will change drastically overnight. Trust me. Now I'm going to read what she said, and then I'm going to correct her. She said, the way to understand this crisis is that it has three players. The first is Congress and President Trump, who says, let's weaken the regulation, which hit really hard. The second part is the regulators themselves, and in particular the Fed and Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank, who took that change in the laws and he ran with it. In fact, he ran further than a lot of people even thought the law let him, in tailoring the oversight of those banks in order to make it as weak as possible. She doesn't know what she's... Part three, which is those executives, those bank CEOs who lobbied hard. Yeah, it just goes on with the same old nonsense. Let me say this. If Elizabeth Warren's IQ were any lower, we would have to put her outside and water her thrice a week. This is a woman who just does not know what the hell she is talking about 90% of the time. She says, Congress needs to act. I'm angry. Congress needs to act to roll back the Trump deregulation reliefs. She says, we need to make a change because it will affect the regulators, and the regulators will make sure that they are engaging in closer supervision. My last video was on the SVB collapse, and a lot of people hit me up and said that I wasn't clear enough on why the collapse happened. One guy even called me a propagandist. But everything that Warren said there, you can throw in the garbage because none of it's true. She's an idiot. Even Barney Frank, who used to be the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee from 2007 to 2011, he's a Democrat. He is the Frank in dodd-frank. He created dodd-frank with Christopher Dodd from the Senate, which made it nearly impossible for businesses to do business with banks because everyone was terrified to take out a loan because of dodd-frank. Frank was recently asked if the Trump deregulation caused the SVB bank to crash. And you would think that Barney Frank, being a very partisan Democrat, would go, yes, that's exactly why. But he didn't. He said that it had absolutely nothing to do with it. I think it's going to be another year and a half of we're going to blame everything that we screw up on Donald Trump's deregulations. That's what it looks like. They tried to blame East Palestine train derailment on his deregulations, and they came out and said it had absolutely nothing to do with it. Now they're doing this. The problem that happened for SVB is going to happen to a lot of other financial institutions. Hell, a lot of institutions, period. But for SVB in particular, the problem was they went 9 months without a risk manager. They didn't have a risk manager. A bank cannot go that long without a risk assessment. And what happened was they did not keep track of the debt load that they were carrying. Since the '08 crash, the Fed's idea of a resolution was to keep very low interest rates. People eventually made gobbles of money because of low interest rates. But they created another government bubble the way they did in the housing market, which Barney Frank was involved in. So SVB finally hired a risk management person named Jay Ursipa. She was a lesbian LGBTQ plus activist who spent a lot of time pushing woke policies on the bank instead of doing risk assessment. Because interest rates were low, the incompetents who were running the bank purchased bonds over $117 billion worth, which accounted for the bulk of the $211 billion they had in assets. And what happened was they went with 10-year bonds. You would think that a bank would hedge that kind of investment somehow. But they went for 10 years for whatever reason, I guess because they just thought that that gravy train of low rates would continue forever. But then Joe Biden and his administration completely screwed up our economy by spending us into oblivion. And because inflation got so bad, the Fed started raising interest rates, which is the normal thing you do to stave off inflation normally. But what happened is SVB, with those interest rates being raised, it made all those bonds that they purchased utterly worthless. Think about it this way, for example. If they bought bonds that paid out, let's just say 3%, and they did it for 10 years, they're locked in at 3% for 10 years because they thought those rates would remain the same, and they didn't think anything otherwise. But then along comes the most incompetent, bumbling fool of a president that we have ever had, along with a complete diversity hire running Treasury. They had to raise rates, and so when they raise the rates, now say the rates for bonds are now going to be 5% they're going to pay. So why would anybody buy SVB's rates at 3% if they could get 5%? That's just an example of the percentages. But why would they do it? The point is that they wouldn't do it. Nobody would buy a bond for a lower rate than they could get elsewhere. Okay, and that's what happened. And so Elizabeth Warren wants to say there was deregulation that caused it. No, what happened was they went woke and they went broke because they didn't have a person who was serious about risk assessment about her job. They went 9 months without one. And then they got her in there and she's doing everything but her job. Now, any Democrat who's out there saying that it was because of Trump's deregulations is someone that doesn't know their ass from a hole in the ground. And the sad truth is that a lot of innocent people are going to be harmed by this. When Joe Biden goes out there and says that government's going to bail them out and that it's not going to cost any of the taxpayers any money, well, then where the hell does he think he's going to get the money from? The government doesn't have any money of its own. Anything it prints, we got to pay them. He said that it's going to be coming out of a fund that the banks pay into for just such an emergency, but there's not enough money to cover SVB and Signature alone. It's going to come from the taxpayers. So the big question that I have is, how is the Biden government bailing out banks that took risks and got screwed because the same government raised rates on bonds that caused the need for a bailout using the little guy's tax dollars? How is that looking out for the little guy? It's not. Okay, thank you for watching this video. If you want to support the channel, visit rpwmedia.com and share our stories with like-minded people. We will see you in the next one.